excited. This is our first official SAC meeting of the academic school year for spring. So welcome and thank you for participating in our first meeting. We're welcoming our faculty here as well because they're going to partake in the conversation that we're going to be having with Dean Ainsley today, along with Dr. Darline Robles with the information that she's going to be giving us today. So we're super duper excited. Thank you guys for coming. And since Dr. Carey he's running a little bit behind, we're going to have Dr. Robles start first, okay? So once he gets here, then he'll follow up on the other end, okay? Thank you guys.
Thank you. I'm a good backup, right? Well, great group. Thanks for being here on a very important topic. I don't have a PowerPoint, but I'm going to try to make this brief because they only have us giving a few minutes. All of you, I'm sure, read the Provost's letter last fall on the importance of diversity and the role that each school will have in providing input to the Provost. I was asked by Dean Gallagher to be Rossier's representative on the Diversity Task Force. And the Diversity Task Force is tasked the first job was to collect data on our school around 3 areas: campus climate, access and opportunity, and access and opportunity in the community. What was important to know in the Provost's memo to all of us was that it was an initiative that was, I think, being revived. It's something that many of us have been involved in. I began at USC in 1972 when we had some issues around access and opportunity for the students that were there in the program, in the master's program. In fact, part of the work that we did as a group of young people spoke to the president at that time, and we started a Centro Chicano. So the campus climate for us was one of being a more welcoming environment for us who were first generation Latinos at the university. So what the Provost is asking us to do is begin to go deeper into what we need to do to make sure that that climate is one that is welcoming, and that there's opportunities for all of us that may not have access to those opportunities as a natural course of work that we do. I believe that Rossier has been a leader in this, in the specific topics that we've been working on with our own diversity and inclusion committee that was chaired by Dr. John Slaughter for the past several years, and now is chaired by Dr. Alan Green. We have done so much in terms of faculty, but we know it's a process. We know it's not done, and it's never done. It's something, a journey that we all have to take together. So some of the campus climate examples that the Provost mentioned in his memo was to assign this as a priority to his 3 associate provosts. So whenever I look as a former superintendent, whenever there was something very important, that leadership role was the one that took that on. So when you have associate provosts taking that on, that means it's a priority of the university, not delegated to somebody that doesn't have that visibility. So I think that's important. He also wants each school to take specific goals and action around campus climate. He's also allocated additional funds for programs. He's also has asked that each school, as I said, recommend a liaison to the diversity task force. Just as a side note, the diversity task force liaisons will be meeting a retreat on February 12th and 13th. So I think after that meeting, I'll work with this group and also the faculty and others to give you feedback on that and what's occurring. On the second goal, access and opportunity, what the Provost has highlighted is that we're a leader in educational access in terms of enrollment of first-generation students and Pell eligible students. And I found this interesting. I didn't know this, and I was very proud of that, is that we have more student religious groups than any other university in America. So I thought that was amazing. And we also commit to do more to increase diversity at all levels, from undergrad, grad, postdoctoral to junior faculty and to senior faculty. I think that's the one that Rossier has been really focused on as we interview potential candidates for tenure faculty and also others, and the input that we are allowed to provide in this I think is critical. Access and opportunity in the community. We all know the university's commitment to the community, the neighborhood academic achievement, the Good Neighbor partnerships that we have, raises over $1 million annually. And also our own Rossier, our dean's commitment to the community by starting 2 incredible charter schools. But we also have to, I think, also begin to look at it in a different way as well, is that we need to hear from the community the impact that the university has on the community. It's a two-way street. You know, we can go out, but what about receiving that input? But I think that the one last comment before I ask for your input is there was one paragraph that I want to read to you. So it really spoke to me. In the end, making our campuses more diverse and inclusive is not just about resources. Resources are a necessary prerequisite, but they will be squandered if not matched by each of us being responsible for making USC a place committed to access, opportunity, diversity, and inclusion. And that speaks to me because it really is about individual action and commitment. All the money in the world, is it going to make a difference? Is it going to make us more inclusive? Is it going to make us more open? It's really our attitudes, our values, and our beliefs that drive our action. And that's critical to remember that as we interact with each other, language we use when we're referring to certain groups or policies, that it's our commitment and our responsibility to move this forward and not make it just something that 10 years from now we'll revisit and say, oh, remember when we did that in 2016? I remember that, we're reviving again. But what is this journey that we continually look and see benchmarks along the road to see that we're making progress? So at the faculty meeting a couple of weeks ago, I asked the faculty to give me input on these three areas. And so I've asked the chair, Sonia, to have these sheets for you, and we're going to hand them out to you. And now you don't have to fill it out today, but also to, you can email it or scan it to me. I'm sorry I didn't put my email on there, but you can find me, right? It's the director, you'll find me. If not, I'm on the 10th floor, you can find me there. We'd really like your information on what you believe we're currently doing in these three areas of campus climate, what we're doing on campus, access and opportunity on campus, access and opportunity within the community. And then the last question is really important to add to this, is where do you believe should be some of our next steps? What do you think, this has been good but not enough? We want to do more, and here's a suggestion. Because it's your input that's going to make this proposal that when we share with the other liaisons and the provost, that we could take action and see that. And also to share with the dean if there's some things that's specific to Rossier that we can do. But it also is for the university at large. So with that, I will end before they do like this to me. They said I had so many minutes. Any questions? Yes, Barbara.
Not so much a question, but just a matter of information, since many of you weren't at the faculty meeting a couple weeks ago, is the Faculty Council has taken on 3 initiatives, 3 task forces, and they're around equity and inclusion, data literacy, which is coming up next week, all our workshops, and I hope everybody will attend one, and quality instruction. So we're looking at those 3 initiatives as an integrated approach, and we're going to appreciate the impact of the input of faculty, staff, students, and community members to really make this work. And Darline is working with Alan on equity and inclusion, and we're really moving forward to get some really measurable and participatory and coordinated activities for everybody to participate in.
Good, thank you. It's not just one area, it's everything that we do. The pedagogy, the evaluations, the instruction, all of that comes together. And data, how do we know we are improving? It's not just a feeling is important, but we want to have really strong benchmarks that we can measure that we are improving in these key areas. Any other questions or comments? I have also been meeting with individual faculty and staff, so if you would like to meet with me and share with me some ideas in terms of a department or a division, please let me know. Email me and say we'd like to meet with you, because you can share with me in person as well. It may not be something you want to write down, but we could talk. I met with Gail Sinatra last week and other professors, so please, that's another opportunity as well to meet over the next couple of weeks, and even after. I'm sure I'll have more, as I said, after the retreat, and get more direction and thought process, and then we'll I'll come back and share with you what I learned, or what I still have questions about. I probably will have more questions than I will have any answers. So please, any other thoughts?
Can you tell us what the structure is? There's so many different groups working on diversity issues at the university level. There's the task force, there's advisors, so forth. Can you outline what the different organizations are that's involved?
I'm probably the one that's least knowledgeable about that as well. I do know that there was a diversity task force in the past, and there were liaisons. I don't know what their work is. I just know that at the retreat, we're supposed to get our arms around that. And I have to do a shout out to Ginger Clark, our own professor, who has really been instrumental in bringing this issue up as chair of the Senate. And I think her leadership is one that we need to support actively and be there for her, because this is a very difficult conversation to have. Everyone has a perspective, everyone has an experience, everyone has some knowledge about it, and how do you have a space where that can be shared and each one's perspective and information valued to move forward, because it is difficult to have conversations around diversity and equity, because it usually comes from who gets in, who gets left out, and when you start viewing the world that way, in and out, it gets uncomfortable. So I will definitely research that, Dr. Slaughter, so when I come back, maybe I can do some kind of a organizational chart and find out what the work is for each of those groups, because as I mentioned, on the Provost side, what the Provost did was ask Sonia and Ainsley Carey to co-chair the task force.
Yeah.
So they'll co-chair that. And then the 3 associates provost will lead the office, the oversight and coordination of all the diversity and inclusion efforts. So how that's divided up, I'm not sure, but we'll probably get more of that at the retreat on February 12th and 13th.
Dr. Slaughter, I can address that in my presentation.
Good.
Okay.
Dr. Curry, come
Yes.
on up here. Don't have me stand here by myself.
I was giving you your space.
I am happy to be displaced. You have more of this information. He's the one with all the answers.
Not all of them, but
Well,
some of them.
probably more than I do, so thank you. I was just going to go back and sit down.
Good afternoon, everyone. First, thank you all very much for giving me this time on your agenda. I know you have a very busy day, so I appreciate you squeezing me in, and I apologize for my tardiness. Rapali here had me held up in another meeting, so. Again, let me introduce myself. My name is Ainsley Carey. I have the pleasure of serving as the Vice President for Student Affairs here at USC. I am in my kind of almost 3rd year at USC. I joined the Trojan family back in 2013 as the Vice President for Student Affairs here. Prior to USC, I was at Auburn University in Alabama and Temple University in Philadelphia and Florida and Arkansas and a few other schools in the Southeast. So I joined the USC family back in 2013 to serve in the role as Vice President for Student Affairs. Many of you, if you've been here for a while, may have known my predecessor, Dr. Jackson. Dr. Michael Jackson was the Vice President for Student Affairs here for quite some time, and I stepped into some really big shoes in following up on his work. But today my conversation is to talk about the work of the Diversity Task Force and the university's efforts to respond to the student resolutions and also the academic Senate resolution around issues of diversity and inclusion, respect, and care. So I'm going to kind of give a big kind of university-wide perspective, and we can drill down on some questions. Dr. Robles did a really good job of talking about what the College of Education is doing. I hope my presentation will talk about the university's response to a number of these resolutions. The next slide I'm going to show you here is probably a lot to read if you're in the back, so I'm going to read it out loud. This is my efforts to describe the challenge that we're faced with. For decades, institutions of higher education have actively recruited and enrolled more diverse student bodies. More students from traditionally underrepresented ethnic communities, from foreign countries, and with varying political and social opinions. This diversity has contributed to a rich intellectual environment. However, institutions have not paid enough attention to how they needed to pivot environmentally, both inside and outside the classroom, to address systemic and structural issues of isms, racism, sexism, homophobia, and the likes. Although incremental adjustments have been made over time, universities have gotten better at working with LGBT students, having women on campus, minority students on campus. The rate of change hasn't kept up with the students' expectations. So the gap now is the expectations that the students have versus the reality of what they experience. And this is the breaking point. This is where we are right now with students saying, I came to the university expecting this. We talk about our great diversity, we talk about our great climate, we talk about the Trojan family, and then some of our students arrive here and they don't experience those things. All of the things that we sell as part of the brochure and the recruitment process. So how do we reduce the gap between expectations and the reality for some students? A good majority of our students have a great USC experience, go off and become productive alum, graduate and give back to the university, but we do have some students who, while they're here, the expectations and the gap in their expectations don't match. So universities are, some universities are 150, 200, 400 years old, and those structures have been in place for a while. But our activities with regard to the recruitment of women, minorities, international students, LGBT students, that's within the past 50 to 60 years. So there are some structural issues in universities, American universities of higher education, that have not caught up with the new opinions that we have on campus, and we have to pay careful attention to those. Here are some national headlines. Here's what's been going on around the country, and I hope you can see it. I don't know if I need to adjust the light so you can see better. Nationally, Harvard, Michigan, Yale, Duke, thank you. A number of schools and students on those campuses started campaigns called I Am Harvard, I Am Michigan, I Am Yale, and so on. So that happened about a year and a half ago. Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Freddie Gray. Black Lives Matter emerged. At the University of Missouri, students went on a hunger strike because of a racial slur that was targeted at the student body president. The football team boycotted, and then two senior administrators of the university, the president and vice president, president and chancellor, had to step down at the university. University of Oklahoma, SAE, had a very offensive video that went viral. Yale University, a faculty member living as a member of their faculty in residence, posed a really intellectual question to the community by saying, should we tell students what to wear during Halloween? Around Halloween, there will be an incident every year at multiple universities where someone will wear something offensive to another ethnic group. And universities over the years have sent out kind of warnings to our student body to say, hey, this year, just be mindful about what you do. Realize that, blackface and afros and watermelon parties or different ethnic-based parties aren't really funny, they're offensive, and they really hamper our environment. So be mindful as you go out this Halloween. And universities typically do that. USC does that. We stop and talk to our Greek letter organization and say, hey, we don't want to do anything offensive, just be mindful what you do. So this faculty member at Yale just raised the question, do we have to tell 18-year-old kids what to do and not to be offensive to each other? Just let them negotiate those things on their own. And that created a backlash at Yale because the student community there said, yes, you should. You have a responsibility to protect us from insensitive other students on our campus. At Yale Law School, some members of the university anonymously covered over the faces of all the black faculty members that were in the law school. That caused a stir. McKenna College in our area demoted or terminated their dean of students for an email comment that was sent to another student. The student asked about some issues about adjustment that they were having, and then the dean responded by simply saying, any student that doesn't feel welcome here, we will help them move on, right? So that wasn't the appropriate response, right? So here are just a few of the national issues that have been going on. Eventually I want to bring it down to what's been happening at USC. So nationally, immediately after what happened at the University of Missouri and the football team and the resignations, a number of students throughout the country bounded together through social media to really launch a campaign to get all of their universities' attention. So that campaign, in support of what happened at University of Missouri and what happened at Oklahoma, that campaign kind of went viral. Right now, about 80 to 85 universities have student groups who have come forward with list of demands. So this one particular website kind of captured all of those demands and put them in order of what was being most requested down to what was being least requested. So of the 51 schools in this list, increased diversity of professors is the #1 request. Requiring diversity training, funding for cultural centers, requiring classes for students, increasing diversity of the student body, track race-related offenses, expand mental health resources, and so on. That's the list of the demands from 51 schools that were in this survey. But the demands have gone beyond 51. There are about, last I checked, about 89 institutions that had students who had come forth with different lists of demands. But this is kind of a big picture summary of the main demands right now. I don't know if there's any demand on the list that needs kind of further clarification. Is there one that you see that you might say, hey, what does that mean? You might have that question when we drill down into the USC demands, but this is a national picture of the demands. Our demands are relatively in line. The demands from our students are relatively in line with this. Last year, 2 years ago, there was a Harvard study about issues of race and diversity and inclusion on their campus. After interviews with a number of students and meeting with faculty members, they came up with the following recommendations about what they should do at Harvard. Communicate existing policies and procedures. They realized that students weren't aware that the university actually had a process for mitigating these circumstances, or meeting with students to talk about it, or addressing them when they happen. Train facilitators by hosting a series of difficult conversations. Bring together people in the university to talk. Faculty, staff, and student training regarding issues of race, diversity, and equity. Commission or omission of materials in courses. They realized that some of our courses were not addressing issues of diversity, and in fact a student may go through an entire academic curriculum and never read or learn about a person of color or a woman making contributions in that discipline. So they wanted more content regarding diversity in their disciplines. Presidential level or provost level person focused on diversity, and equip students with the knowledge of how to deal with this. Equip students with the knowledge of how to deal with resilience, how to respond to some of these issues, but also how to report it, how to let someone at the university know. More often than not, students will deal with something offensive in a classroom, whether said by a student or a faculty member, and just deal with it, just absorb it, just assume that this is how it is and I don't have anyone to tell this to. But that creates a lot of anxiety, depression, and it creates a real downward spiral for students. So what's the outlet? How do we let students know how to express it, how to share it with a counselor, how to share it with a friend, how to report it to the university? Because we need to know if these patterns are happening. But where will a student find that information has been the question. How do I know that I can report this, and where should I report it to? So many students take this as, this is my problem, this is my issue, so I won't share it with anyone else. University of Illinois did a very similar study where they held focus groups, and their recommendations were very similar to what the recommendations at Harvard was. Train faculty and staff, evaluate campus leadership with regard to the diversity of the university's leadership, empower students to act, address declines in enrollment, especially in the area of African American and Native American students, and host campus dialogues on these topics where students have a chance to express themselves and talk about what's going on. So you'll notice many of these action items are also showing up in our action items. But these were reports that were done about a year ago, before the kind of current climate issues took effect. So here's what's happened at USC over the past 2 years. This is not a comprehensive list of everything, but many of you may recognize some of these kind of flashpoints. Minority student enrollment trends have changed over the past, not just in the past 2 years, but over the past 10 to 15 years. Some populations have made progress, some populations have decreased, some populations have remained stable with regard to student enrollment stats. Microaggressions in the classrooms, residence halls, and campus environments. So if someone says something insensitive in a classroom, a faculty member or a student, or students gathering in groups to work on a project, and someone says, "Oh, we need to make sure we have an Asian kid in here if we're going to do these quantitative analysis completely." So students have listed very offensive comments that have happened, not only from their classmates, but also a faculty member, and also going by fraternity row. They will hear things that make them feel very uncomfortable here. Allegations of racial profiling by our campus police department. A shooting on campus around Halloween, and soon thereafter, fences went up around our area. Students are citing that as something that has changed the campus climate. LAPD response to an off-campus party, students are citing that as an area that's creating concern. Hate mail was sent to cultural offices at USC probably about 2 years ago. The Asian student office received a flyer that went to USC and went to UCLA of very offensive materials, and students took on to that, and we had a lot of campus conversations. An alleged racial slur to our university student body president, and then the climate resolutions from faculty and students came soon thereafter. All of the information with regard to our response to the students' needs and the Provost memo and everything that's been going on is captured right now at this website, diversity.usc.edu. If you have a mobile device on you, I welcome you to kind of open it and go to it right now, because I'm just going to point out a few items that are on there right now. But everything we are doing with regard to our response to diversity issues is being completely chronicled on this site. So all of the task force meetings, the open forums, events and activities, everything is included here right now. So we're kind of making this kind of the central landing place for everything going on diversity right now. So the climate resolutions have 4 major components. These are the resolutions that came from students, undergraduate student body, graduate student body, as well as the academic senate. These are the 4 major themes that live there. A vice presidential level appointment or chief diversity officer, mandatory training of students, faculty, and staff around issues of diversity, data transparency with regard to enrollment numbers of students, and hiring practices with regard to how many faculty of diversity do we have in each of the schools, right? And where does that information live, and making that information public, and resources for cultural centers. Again, if we go back to that list of national demands, is very similar to this. So our students are relatively in line with the list of demands that have been going on around the country. So here has been the Provost memo response. On that website that I just sent you to, if you click on the Welcome tab, you'll see message from the Provost if you go down. And it will open up this multi-page memo that the Provost submitted to the university community. So this is the university's response. The president was involved in this response. Members of the board reviewed the response. The entire Provost cabinet was involved in the response. So this is the university's response. And these are the 10 items that will launch this. This is in the end, this is the beginning of a series of conversations that need to happen. One is a diversity task force. So Varun, Sony, and I chair the diversity task force. There are 10 members. The names of those members are on the website. 10 members including 2 faculty members, 2 undergraduate students, 2 graduate students, 2 staff members, and Varun and I. And we facilitate the conversation with a 10-member task force. That task force also includes a 40-member, 35 to 40-member advisory board. And that larger advisory board advises the smaller task force. The task force takes the advice from the large group and then builds it into a document and submits it as recommendations to the provost. So there's an advisory board and a small 10-member task force. There's a series of open forums that are facilitated by George Sanchez and Tara McPherson. They happen once per month. The first one was last month, right? Yes, last month we had the first open forum just to open to the community this conversation. Maybe 100+ students attended. There was a great exchange. The provost was there, and we collected a lot of information from there. So that those open forums also advise the task force. Okay, so the task force is the center. Dr. Slaughter asked a good question about the structure. The 10-member task force is the center. Around that task force, there are a number of groups that we go out and grab information from. One of them will be the open forums. There's a series of open forums. That information is included on the website that I just provided to you. The dates and the topics. We go to each of those, listen to the community, bring information back. Last week, I believe the Ethnic Studies Department hosted a conversation about the GE requirement. We attended that conversation and we'll bring information back to the task force and outline a recommendation. Now, those groups are also writing recommendations as well. The provost asked for us to do the best that we can to centralize those recommendations so that their office isn't receiving 5 different recommendations that may conflict with each other. We're not telling them not to write their recommendations, but we are trying to centralize that effort. There's a symposium series that has not been planned yet about many of these conversations. The provost's office will act as the primary office of oversight. It will be centralized. All matters regarding diversity and inclusion, it will all center around the provost's office. Matters of diversity and inclusion will be embedded into the university's strategic plan, and they are asking for the schools to establish strategic plans around issues of diversity and inclusion. USC Visions and Voices will commit a year, not this current year, but they will commit a year, and they have received about $100,000 in funding to do programs focused on diversity and inclusion. The student organizations have received $100,000 to do issues of diversity and do programming around this area. The provost is asking for faculty members to submit evidence-based proposals about great ideas or courses that we can move towards in this area. Residential education is doing more diversity programming, and we had to make it clear how to report incidents of bias. We have had a long-standing practice where a student can report an incident of bias. They will call to the Division of Student Affairs, and we will take them through the process. So if a student had someone write a racial slur on their residence hall door, they can report it to the Division of Student Affairs, and the first thing that we do is we meet with that student and we ask them, what would you like to do? How can we help you through this? Some students will say, look, just clean it off my door, I don't want to deal with it. Some students say, I want to find out who did this and I want that person sanctioned. And then we will try our best to do that. It's tough when someone just scribbles something on the door, but if a student can identify who did it, we will meet with that student and talk to them about what's going on and the impact they've had on their community. Usually we get them to offer some type of apology. That's if we can identify the offenders in these incidents. But students didn't know how to engage that process. And right now, we've asked students to download an app called Live Safe. It's our campus safety app. So we installed this about a year ago. All over campus we have blue phones, but we realize everyone doesn't know what a blue phone is. When you most need a blue phone, you are nowhere near a blue phone. So we purchased an app. All students can download Live Safe app, and at that app, students can report incidents of bias as well as call for assistance. The Diversity Task Force, here's a list of everyone that's involved in it. I mentioned the task force has an advisory board that's about 30 members. The key to the task force, meet with the stakeholders, provide suggestions, report progress, and make specific recommendations. Everything that we're doing is listed at that website. So yes, those were the main points that I wanted to point out today. So there are a number of conversations going on. The provost has charged a small 10-member task force with the responsibility of gathering all that information, kind of wordsmithing recommendations, going back to that community and saying, does this make sense? Is this what you intended? And then submitting that to the provost. We will submit recommendations to the provost throughout the semester. So it won't be one single final document, because there are some things that people are realizing we need to address sooner rather than later. So we will submit our recommendations as we can get them nice and tight and get the consensus that we need throughout the community. So I'll pause there and take any questions. Yes, sir.
Dr. Sherry, could you tell us a little bit about some of the avenues available to us to communicate ideas to improve this plan?
Thank you. So how do you communicate if you wanted to participate in the process? So there are a couple things. The task force has a 30-member advisory board. The 30-plus member advisory board is a little flexible. People have been coming in and out. It meets every Friday from 2 to 4, right? But it's 30 people, and it's hard to get in there and get a word in edgewise. So it's a place to gather information and process itself. On the website, the diversity.usc.edu website, there's a place for comments where you can submit it. You can submit it, put your name on it, submit it confidentially. But there's a place on the website where people can go in, click, and write. There's some drop-down information they can fill in, but then write any information that you would like. And that is read by the 2 co-chairs of the task force. And then we bring it back to the task force meetings to say, hey, Dr. Slaughter offered this suggestion. What are your thoughts, right? So please go to that website and offer information. Also, during the open forums, there are 4 open forums scheduled. Anyone from the university is welcome to come to the open forums and offer your ideas. The open forums are typically topical, but we've had a number of ideas come in through the open forums. So you're welcome to plug into anything that exists on that website. Thank you for that. Yes?
2 other groups that I'd like for you to clarify. The one that Darline serves on, which is representative from the school.
Yes.
And then there is a diversity liaison group, which
Yes.
is different than...
Yeah, good question. So, there are diversity liaisons in each of the schools. The students asked, or the climate resolution said, we want a single person that will act as chief diversity officer and kind of oversee the entire university's efforts to move this forward. Those of you in the schools who understand the structure of the schools and the complexity of each of the schools know that that would be a very difficult job for one person to sit somewhere in central administration and oversee all of the schools doing that. So the provost decided, let's move to a school-based liaison model, asking the deans of each schools to appoint someone in their school that will be the focus for their school. So instead of 1 diversity officers for the entire university, the model today is 19 diversity officers, 1 for each of the schools. So each of the schools made that decision. The deans made that decision based on the best interests of their schools, the individual schools. And that individual will provide the guidance and the support with regard to issues of diversity and inclusion. Now, as we have gone through a couple weeks of this, one of the things that we realize, the position descriptions and the roles and the responsibilities and the activities of that single person in each of the schools hasn't been clarified. So that's the purpose of the retreat. So the focus of the retreat is to bring all the diversity liaisons together and say, all right, what's everyone's minimum standard? You should have access to what information, you should have the authority to intervene in what, how do you work with students, how do you work with faculty? So we started to realize also some schools are so big, or some schools are so small that 1 person could do it in a school, and some schools are so big that it needs more than 1 person. And some of the faculty issues are so complex that the person handling student issues and faculty issues may need to be different. So as we unroll the liaisons at the school level, we're starting to realize the amount of complexity and the challenge of having 1 person do this. So right now we are meeting with the school-based liaisons and also the liaisons that have been in place for faculty issues. So the faculty liaison, the casting the net widely liaisons, those have been in place for more than a year. But now students have asked for a liaison that will focus on students' issues of diversity and inclusion, hiring practices, and so on. So now we are pulling the schools, the liaisons together to say, all right, let's think this through and who's doing what. Some of the liaisons may say, that's perfect, that's exactly what I signed up for. Some of the liaisons may say, oh, I didn't know I was going to have to do that because I don't have time. So some of the schools have appointed people at 50% time. Some people may have this as a 10% assignment. Some people are doing this full time for some of the schools. So it's an incredible amount of diversity among the schools at USC. So it's hard to create a template that all schools should follow. And that's going to be our great challenge, to make sure that those who are in need feel like they're being served by the structure that we've created. So there are 2 types of liaisons going on. There's another group, the Academic Senate has a climate committee. And the climate committee is doing many of the same things these groups are doing. Again, the Provost Task Force is grabbing that information from all of the groups that are working on it, bringing them into the room, talking through their ideas and resolutions with the hopes of speaking as a single voice to the provost and senior administration. But we are all advisory to the provost and president. None of us are making the final decision in these committees. But the strength of our decisions and the strength of the opinions are strengthened when we say students, faculty, and staff have debated this, discussed this, and we agreed to this structure. Right? So the strength of our decisions is how uniform we are in our presentation. Did that answer your question about the groups? Other questions? Yes.
So specifically to Rossier,
Uh-huh.
is Dr. Robles the person, or someone else, a student liaison? And then, two, since this is a staff-driven event, how can you be a little more detailed about staff's involvement in diversity?
Gotcha. So right now, we went to the deans. Elizabeth Grady asked each of the deans, send me your appointee for the diversity liaisons. You have access to who's on the site? Dr. Robles?
Slaughter.
Oh, Dr. Slaughter is the one on the Rossier site as the point person. Dr. Robles, is your role with the Casting the Net Widely liaison?
It's just the opposite thing.
It's just the opposite. Okay.
Dr. Robles is the Rossier point person. And I was on the Casting the Net Widely
For a long time, right.
Yeah.
So let me admit something, in that there's been a bit of confusion on that, right? Because some time ago, in the effort to create diversity among faculty, there was a call for schools to identify a person that will work in the space of casting the net widely. So that person had been appointed, they have met, and that person is actively involved. And then suddenly there's this request for a diversity liaison in each of the schools to focus on student issues. So the thought was, oh, just appoint the same person who's doing it and casting the net widely, right? So suddenly those names populated the website. And then we realized, ooh, wait a minute, these are two different charges, right? They're related, but there's some overlap. So the schools kind of had to, some of them have to go back and say, oh, our one person is the one person that can handle both because of our size. Some schools had to say, wait a minute, we're much more complex and larger than that. We need two people doing this. So that's what's going on for Rossier specifically. Dr. Robles and Dr. Slaughter are the two, but they're not on the website right now, so we got to think about who's on the website. And that's one of the things that's happening soon. Now, with regard to staff, as we flesh out this model of diversity liaisons at the school-based level, there will be activities. I think each school is going to think about it differently because each school has to build a strategic plan around issues of diversity and inclusion. Some of it will be with regard to hiring diverse faculty. Of course, there will be a faculty person overseeing that for the school. Some of it will be in regards to issues of diversity, inclusion, LGBT, race, access, opportunity. I think that's wide open space for staff in the schools to lend their voice to that as a school. The Provost's office has typically been, and even the President's office has typically been very cautious about micromanaging the schools. The schools have deans, and the deans are kind of the presidents of that school. So they have a tremendous amount of flexibility to make decisions about what's in the best interest of the school. So I couldn't give a single answer to the template of what each school would look like because it will be different in every school. What we are working on establishing now are what are the minimum expectations for every school, right? And then schools who want to go above and beyond that have the flexibility to do so. But we're hoping for a strategic plan at the school level that addresses issues of diversity, inclusion, access, and opportunity at what makes sense for that school. And all of those efforts would be gathered from the 19 schools, and the Provost's office will act as the central hub that will hold all of those plans accountable. Yes, sir.
Hey, I'm Ansar.
Good to see you.
Yeah, I'm pretty familiar with what's going on with the task force. But one of the things that's, I guess, been troubling me about this is that, after all this happened, I think my alma mater, I went to Brown, the president, and, it was kind of more so the president of Brown Paxson. He's like, you know what? We're committing to $100 million, and we're going to work this out.
Right.
And it was more so on the administration side that they had the will. I guess when I'm looking at this, when I continue to think about this, it's more like, I guess what's troubling is that, there was the request for $100 million, but now it's like, you know, we're going to give you 100,000. I want you to talk about this. And I don't know, I just feel like through this time, things are going to be diluted. You know, let's try to come up with a cohesive idea of what's going on when we have a lot of different players that are here. So, I mean, I guess my worry is that, like, regardless of how much effort we're putting on our end, if the admin doesn't have, you know, the will, what does it matter? So I guess what I'm asking is, one, I'm concerned most with materials results, you know, so is there a timeline in regards to how many conversations or discussions are happening? Because I think that could be a little much after a while. So is there a timeline for the discussions? And two, like, when can we start to expect something like, you know, the EDGE program? Because if we're concerned about, like, faculty of color and training faculty of color, we need those programs to be reinstated, and I think that's more of a material issue as opposed to a will issue on the you know, students' behalf.
Good questions. Let me go to the Brown, the president's response at Brown. So if you kind of study all of the universities and how they have responded, in some places the president of the university has been forefront in responding to it. In some places the provost of the university has been at the forefront in responding to it. So state, public, private, 4-year, 2-year, different institutions have had different people kind of be the point person. So, I mean, we can pick Harvard, Yale, or Princeton and identify the presidents who have stepped forward or the provosts who have stepped forward. In the USC model, the provost has stepped forward as the voice of this case. The students and the faculty have brought up the point. Where's the president on this? We haven't heard the president's voice on this, so I completely acknowledge that, right? But so and the provost attempted to respond to this the other night by saying he can't speak on behalf of the president, but he knows it is his assignment as the academic leader of the university to step forward and respond to this. And he sees this as one of the central academic issues of the university. So the provost has taken the lead on this, and that's where he is right now. He stepped forward and taken the lead on this. The entire university is aware of it. The president and the board is aware. We speak as one voice. The university's memo to this item is the voice of the university community with regard to the president and the provost. So the provost is saying, I'm stepping up and taking a leadership role in this. And I understand there's a difference of opinion about how that should happen. So with regard to timeline, so there are some things with regard to the resolutions that I showed you kind of the 4 main points of the resolutions. There are some things that can be acted on fast, right? That we can figure out quick. But there are some things that have to be part of a long-term strategic plan. Like, for example, if we think about student enrollment today and the characteristics of our student body today with regard to all of the groups of ethnic diversity in our student body, we're not going to turn that around next year. The incoming class of 2017 won't solve that. That has to be part of a long-term strategic plan, how we think about that and where we think about that. So the admissions office is part of this conversation about laying down a long-term strategic plan. With regard to the diversity liaisons, that's something we can think about today. And the chief diversity officer conversation, that's something that we can think about and work on today. So there's some things that we can move into place soon, and there's some things that that are part of a long-term strategic plan. What we intend to do with the task force, the advisory boards, the open forums, the Senate climate group, we're pulling all of that information in and submitting recommendations to the provost as we finalize them. So we expect next Monday to submit a recommendation with regard to diversity liaison and chief diversity officer. And that's because we are having conversations with students, pulling from the resolutions and offering that recommendation. So there's some things we're going to be able to act on fast. There's a request for data transparency, and we are fine-tuning that request right now, and we also hope next Monday we can offer that as a recommendation to the provost and senior administration of the university. So there are some things that we will see results in fast. So before the end of the semester, we hope that we can address the immediate concerns. But there are some things that require long-term strategic planning. Like the schools need a school-based plan. Our university is divided into 19 small universities. And the deans have a tremendous amount of power at the school level. I can't ask them to submit a strategic plan for diversity by the end of the semester. So how do we play that out? When do we play that out? How do we think that through? What should be in the plan? So there's some questions like this. What we're also dealing with right now, and this is kind of in parts of Antar's question, there's a lack of trust right now. And as a senior administration, as a university with a 100+ year history, we've been through a lot, and some groups have felt underserved here. And we have to overcome that. And the only way we can do it is by producing results. And it's empty to stand up in front of any group and say, I promise you we'll get it done. We just got to get it done. We just have to make progress on things that people have said we have not made progress on and we've been slow to respond to. This provost has promised that. He has said that multiple times. I'm going to echo his comments about our promise to do better. But we know that's not going to satisfy anybody until we just do it. Right? So that's where we are right now, because as soon as we can get some things moving, then we can build the trust that we need for people to kind of relax and say, okay, this is a good faith conversation. But there have been some demands that need to be detailed out. Like, for example, there's a demand for mandatory diversity education. And then I asked the question, we got 41,000 students. It's mandatory for all 41,000? 10,000 of them are online. What about the kids that are online? What about faculty? Mandatory for all faculty? 7,000 faculty. What about NTTs? Mandatory for all of them? What about faculty that are represented by unions? Is it mandatory for all of them? And if a faculty member does not do it, what are the consequences then? If a student doesn't do it, what are the consequences then? So I think it's easy to toss out a resolution and say we must have this. The hard work is taking that resolution and vetting it out, really thinking it through. And there's a little frustration in having to do that. And I get it, but it's not easy work. When we implement something and say it's mandatory for everyone, we've got to think the process all the way through. What tool are we distributing to the university and saying everyone is required to take this? Is this some instrument we download offline and then send it out to the campus community? We got to vet the instrument. We have to have our researchers look at it and say, yes, this makes sense. Should we pilot it for the first year on students? What about graduate students? What if they don't take it? If they don't take it, are they out of their programs? Do they not receive their aid? So I just need us to have the conversation about the details of the demands. You take any one of the demands, there are 10 questions that follow those demands, and that's what we're going through right now. We're trying to go through as fast as possible, but we really need the time to be rigorous about these requests so that when we step on the gas and put it in, it makes sense and it doesn't explode on us. I want to thank you for your time. I was told that I was out of time, but thank you all very much.
Thank you guys so much for coming. I know we all have to get back to our busy schedules.
We're
and
getting
work.
there, but
So make sure if you have the time, you can leave your form in the back of the office there. If not, you can stop by WPA 601. You can drop it off at my desk, and I'll be happy to collect it for you. Please keep out for a survey that's going to be coming your way for our staff in the next coming weeks, and we're also going to have our next snack attack on February 11th. So keep up the good work, and thank you.